Welcome everyone, welcome all. Don't hesitate to take a seat, and thank you so much for coming on this beautiful morning. You are here to learn about source to sea nature-based solutions and the synergies between them. Before we start, I would like to do a quick check of the people of the room. You know, it's very nice to know your audience. Can you very rapidly, if you know about or have worked on source-to-sea thinking before, can you raise your hand? Okay, so I would say, I'm not counting you speakers, sorry. So I would say, okay, about 10 people in the room, okay. And if you know about and have worked on before the nature-based solution concept, please raise your hand. Okay. Scattered, but there. Okay, thank you very much. So before we start, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Ruth Matthews, who is the senior manager at SEWI and the coordinator of the action platform for source-to-sea management. Ruth, please come online.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for coming. And it was nice to see that some people know source to sea and some people know nature-based solutions, but I don't know that I caught hands that went up for both. And so that's a really great opportunity for this session to be able to, bring these two together. So as a start to this program, I just want to say, we are in a very urgent situation. We've got the climate crisis, we've got biodiversity loss, we've got pollution, and we have been approaching them from a perspective of, individual crises. But in fact, they are connected. And one of the ways that we can understand them as being connected is through this source-to-sea thinking. So how are we going to solve these crises? The more that we look at the solutions that we can find associated with climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, the more we see that we need to look towards nature as part of the solutions to the crises. And this is going to really take a change in our thinking, in our behavior, in the way that we structure our economies and our lives. Because we approach nature as if it's out there, a resource that we can use, as opposed to it being the foundation that our lives depend upon. And so as we look at these triple planetary crises, and with a particular focus on climate change here, we really need to step away from this perspective of nature as a resource to nature as an ally, and actually nature as a solution. Unfortunately, the way that we have been developing our governance, our finance, our plans, investments, even our science has been very segmented and fragmented. We tend to focus on one issue, one problem, one location, one sector, and get expertise in that, but unfortunately we keep blinders on in terms of the relationships between our own expertise, our own focus points, and those around us. And this is what has, to a large extent, led us to having these triple planetary crises, because by segmenting the way that we approach our lives and our economic development, sustainable development, by segmenting and fragmenting those, we lose opportunities to create a holistic, synergistic approach to how we live on the planet. And so as we move forward, boy, I'm not tracking what this 9:04. Okay, I have still 9 minutes. That's great. Sorry about that interruption, but I just was looking at the timer and I thought, wow, I only have a few minutes left, but I can talk a lot longer now. So So as we look at the challenges that we're facing, we really need to think about how can we approach it in a different way. And this is what we've done by with the source to sea approach and the work that we've been doing. So what do I mean by source to sea? First of all, a source to sea system is the land, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems. And these are interconnected and interlinked and really one system. And in fact, they are not just one system from the upstream to the downstream, but they also are one system from the downstream to the upstream. And so this is something, the circularity of relationship between the land and the freshwater and coastal or marine environments is central to what we are talking about when we're talking about source to sea. The source to sea systems are connected through what we call source to sea flows, and these include water, biota, sediments, pollution, the built environment, and most particularly ecosystem services. And it's these ecosystem services that we need to look at and rely on as we develop our responses to climate change, to biodiversity loss, to pollution, and as we aim towards sustainable development. So what does that look like? As these flows connect across the source to sea continuum, they are affected by the activities that we do in those locations. And so we might put in dams that affect the flows of water, the migration of biological species, the sediment transport. They may alter the water quality and affect ecosystem services. So as we transition towards thinking from source to sea, we need to be thinking about how do our activities affect the source to sea flows, these key flows. To go forward with that, we can be thinking about, sorry, I'm being distracted. We can think about different ways to capture the values and the services that come from healthy ecosystems. So what we're learning these days is that freshwater ecosystems, the wetlands, the floodplains, the rivers, tidal marshes, salt marshes, estuaries, deltas, the nearshore seagrass beds, coral reefs, the species in these, both plant and animal species in these ecosystems are really actually the tools that we have to be able to bring forward climate solutions, because they provide climate mitigation through carbon capture, they provide climate adaptation through addressing changing floods and droughts risk, reducing those. They clean the water, and they really serve as our allies in addressing climate change. So how do we go forward? I just don't believe I still have 9 minutes. So I just don't believe this timer. Can someone really give me a true? I have 2 minutes, yeah. It's telling me I still have 9 minutes. Okay, so this is why I'm confused. Okay, so next steps. We need to have more coordinated governance. We need to break the silos between the different agencies, the different perspectives, the different sectors, and really come together and address these issues through a coordinated governance. We need to be able to look at trade-offs together and the co-benefits that could come so that we are focused on the solutions that will bring the most benefits to the source-to-sea system as a whole. We need also to look at those synergies, to see the source-to-sea system in a holistic way so that we are looking at climate action through the source-to-sea lens and identifying those nature-based solutions that can really lead us towards the most value for across the source-to-sea system. So how do we do this? We need to build more capacity and willingness to work across different silos, to work across different sectors, to work across different segments of the source-to-sea system. We also need to bring this holistic, system-wide thinking into the way that we look at climate action, whether through the NDCs, the NAPs, for mitigation or adaptation. And we really need to be able to create a holistic approach to the use of nature-based solutions so that instead of bits and pieces, we are creating a synergistic whole of activities. Obviously, we need to monitor and learn and adapt, because without that, we will not be able to learn from the actions that we've been taking and improve upon them, because we don't know everything about how these source-to-sea systems interact. And finally, I want to say I'm also the coordinator of the Source-to-Sea platform. This is a platform of organizations that are all committed to this holistic management of land, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems. And there's a tremendous amount of resources available through the platform. And we also welcome new organizations to join us. I'm sorry for my confusion by the timer, but I appreciate your attention, and I hope you enjoy this event. Thank you.
Thank you. It's because it's the time of the day. Thank you so much, Ruth. And I want to say I work at the French Biodiversity Agency. By the way, my name is Andrea Ferret. I haven't said that. I work at the French Biodiversity Agency. We are very happy to co-convene this event with the Swedish Agency for Marine Water Management, and we met through the Source-to-Sea platform. So I can attest to the help that this platform provides to its members, and to the quality of the meetings and the quality of the discussions of the platform. So if you are from an organization that works or wants to work more at the Source-to-Sea level, definitely think about joining. Thank you very much, Ruth.
Okay, thank you.
So without further ado, it is my very great pleasure to call onto the stage the panelists for panel 1, which will be about aligning the nature-based solutions and aligning source-to-sea thinking. So we saw what source-to-sea thinking is about, looking at the catchment scale, looking at the flows going from the source to the sea, and what can nature-based solutions, which are often localized and very dependent on one ecosystem at a very local level, how can they fit into this approach of source-to-sea? So first, I call to the stage Flore Lafaye de Michaud, who is Senior Advisor for Europe at the Secretariat of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. Welcome, Flore. Then I call to the stage Mrs. Verena Schrameyer from the Global Biodiversity Lead at DHI. Hello, Verena. And finally, Michael Nielemans, who is Integrated Water Resources Management Technical Officer at the Wetlands International. Welcome, Michael. So I will start with you, Michael, and don't forget to step in and talk to the mic so everyone can hear. Can you tell us about a time where an NBS, so nature-based solutions, NBS project or a biodiversity conservation project, especially in wetlands where you specialize, was changed or even improved by the introduction of source-to-sea thinking?
Yeah, thank you, Andrea, for providing this opportunity to speak about one of our case studies where we applied source-to-sea thinking. Can we go to the slide?
Oh, I don't have any slides.
Oh, you don't have slides? Okay. No, I'll do it without slides, no problem. So we came into the Central Rift Valley of Ethiopia. It's a system of 4 lakes, an endorheic basin that are all connected with each other. And in the north you have the freshwater lake of Ziway, which is vitally important for over 2 million people and their livelihoods. And in the center of the basin you have the Abiata Lake, which is the reason why we came to the area actually. It's vitally important for migratory water birds, and that's why we came there, because we saw Lake Abiata was shrinking rapidly. The surface area of the lake had been reduced by almost 70% within a period of 15 years. But when we came to the area, we quickly realized that you cannot just look at that lake, or specifically, for example, at a migratory water bird species like lesser flamingo, but that you have to look at the wider basin to understand the problem that you're trying to address. What we did as an organization is we tried to understand the wider area, and I'm a bit too tall for this microphone. We did a multitude of interventions, but I'll just try and highlight 2 of them, especially one that was very important for the nature-based solution angle, was that we realized that there was a lot of degraded land in this region. And what that meant is that when rainfall came in, there was high levels of erosion that took the sediment straight to the lake, and that actually made the problem even worse, because it meant the depth of the lake was becoming more shallow, increasing evaporation, aggravating the problem. We analyzed the whole area, and we tried to map sort of the main areas of erosion, and we applied the concept of wetland sponges there, which meant of restoring the land upstream, so that you have a system where the rain comes in, it doesn't immediately flood away the land, but it actually captures the water, and it slowly releases it towards the lakes. And in some cases, there actually natural springs started popping up again, which was very important for the communities there. Another very visual problem that we tried to address is we were working together with the Rift Valley Lakes Basin Administration Authority, which is the water authority for that area in Ethiopia. And they had very limited data on which they were making their decisions. And we came in there 7 years ago. The only source of data was a storeroom with many notebooks dating 30 years back of the water heights of the different rivers and lakes in the region. But it was never digitalized and just put in the storeroom, and no one ever looked at it. So we have made many steps there through the work of our partners to, first of all, digitize this very vital information, but also to install a telemetric station, to do a wetland inventory, and really increase the capacity of the data at the water authority so that they can make better decisions and also have a better understanding of the health of the lakes. I just wanted to highlight what I think are the key reasons for success within our work within this basin. And the main reason, I think, is that we worked through an integrated approach, which the source-to-sea thinking is really promoting, of course. And for us, I think it was kind of easy in this basin because you had a very visual problem. You could go to Lake Abiata with a stakeholder, and they they could see you're basically walking in a desert. So everyone recognized there was a huge issue there that needed to be addressed, as well as every stakeholder had a key interest in conserving the lake. And it's a bit of a technical story, but conserving the Lake Abiata is vitally important also for the freshwater lake in the north, on which many of the stakeholders rely on for their livelihoods. So everyone had a key interest in conserving, which made it a very easy problem to bring all the stakeholders together on this issue. I think another key reason for success is coming back to this data story and really trying to first better understand the whole system that you're working before you implement your nature-based solutions. So in my case, we didn't just start implementing with solutions around the lake, that's the reason why we came to that region for, but actually we did very little direct implementation around the lake, but actually worked in very more upstream areas that beforehand maybe we wouldn't have thought about that we would be working there. So yeah, that's my key reasons for success. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and without slides as well. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so we see, sponges, wetland sponges is like one example of the ecosystem services that wetlands can provide, and to see that this has been such a domino effect of positive things coming up from this restoration, because you dared to look at the whole catchment level and not just the thing that you came there for. It's very inspiring and very interesting to see also that because the problem was so visible and desirable to be solved, that it helps bringing partners on board. And the part about the notebooks to monitor the health of the river and the wetlands is very striking to me, because we see that the data is really important to achieving a good nature-based solution, but also achieving a good health of the whole catchment from source to sea or source to lake in this case. So on that thought about the data, I want to go to you, Verena. Can you tell us about your project, which is called BioQ, and what kind of problem it solves for the people on the ground for doing nature-based solutions, and what kind of information gap it fills?
Yes. So I take. Won't be any slides?
Yes, there will be the slides.
Yes, so I would like to talk to you today about a tool that we've been developing over the last 2 years. I'm a marine ecologist by trade, based at DHI, and what we're doing is water advisory. Cannot quite see? No, I can see. So what we're also working on is to have this ecosystem-based approach. That's the ecosystem-based management that we would like to support in all our work. And so with seeing what's going on out there, we have a big global crisis in biodiversity. I guess all of us in the room are aware of that. So with implementation of nature-based solutions, we have several different aspirations that are also listed here. The functionality is, of course, key to our solutions that we want to implement. But to restore ecosystem service values, that's really what we need to go into. Multifunctional use of an NBS to also enhance this biodiversity that ultimately drives the ecosystem services. That's where we would like to come into and bring on a tool that can effectively measure and quantify this biodiversity. And that's something where a lot of people are discussing at this point in time. And so we've been producing this tool and testing it. And we feel that this is the first step to bring and roll it out there, to have a tool that we can then evaluate our efforts that we're trying to restore our nature to the point that they can be functioning and leading to a functional ecosystem. So this multifunctional purpose of an NBS, that could really help us to come into, can I point with this?
Yeah.
No. That I can bend the curve, or that we can bend the curve. With business as usual, the biodiversity crisis will not do anything, and we can see that this trajectory will go right down there and just keep going. Increased conservation efforts that we see out there already are certainly doing some change, but we really need this increased conservation efforts. So building with nature, nature-based solution implementations, but also ways of how we can measure these efforts to learn from and share the knowledge and talk about how can we do things best, identify best practice. We said before NBS are very localized, and that's most of the time the case, but still we can learn from each other how things have been done. Don't be afraid of talking about things that have not worked. That's actually how we can progress the best if we talk about our failures and our errors. The way we looked at biodiversity and the way most of us are still looking at it, and reporting guidelines are still requiring us to report, is taxonomic diversity, looking at who is there and how many are there, looking at maybe just the indicator species, just to have it a very efficient and cost-efficient monitoring program. And that's great for our overall budget, but for where we want to land to really understand our ecosystem, we're missing a lot of information. So where we think we can really make a difference is with this type of tool. We call it the EBM BioQ, very clunky name, the Ecosystem-Based Management Biodiversity Quantification Tool. And we are considering these 3 types of characteristics of who is out there in my ecosystem. We of course need to start with the taxonomic diversity. What type of creatures do you have in the ecosystem, in the site, wherever you're active with whatever you want to do out there? But then once you have the name of your species, you can by now also add functionality. What are they doing? Are they photosynthesizers? Are they predators? Are they burrowing? Are they nutrient releasing? What type of niche do they fulfill? What type of role do they fulfill? And from there we can then resolve the interactions. All of these computations are based on existing ecological statistics that have been applied in many ways, but single out, not in this kind of combined approach. The way we can then do this is we go out there, we go to our different sites or to one site in different types of plots. We have a reference site that we compare to, more pristine conditions or simply time 0 of whenever you started your active efforts. You count your species, that's still where we start, and your individuals to really get a measure on what's my taxonomic diversity. But then you also resolve these kind of all these 3 aspects that I just mentioned before. We can then standardize within these 3 categories and come to this combined number. It is a very abstract way, but we come to, in my ecosystem, as a 5. And that's a way how we can communicate it very easily, but with a very complex scientific backbone. So it can really be understood as a performance indicator. Whenever we want to resolve NBS in a good way, we can start with designing process. We can run simulations. We can compute it on what if we can up this species, what if we can create a niche for this particular key species that I want to have in there. So a real ecosystem-based assessment can be done. And then we can have this localized monitoring that allows for adaptive monitoring, but also adaptive management of whatever site you're active on. So we can identify optimal NBS, we can meet biodiversity impact reporting that's rolling out worldwide, and we can really make a difference by applying such a tool. So that was my little message for today.
Thank you so much, Verena. Very interesting. Yes, we can clap. Yeah. Very interesting to see, where the rubber meets the road, and how, you need tools, concrete tools to evaluate what's there, evaluate what sort of impact you could have if you did this or this, and really, get real about doing nature-based solutions and restoration and doing it at a larger scale. I want to move on to Floor. What can you tell us about the way that you integrate source-to-sea thinking in your work at the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, and using examples from Ramsar sites that are exceptional wetlands and things that you are proud of in your work?
Thank you so much, Andrea. I'm very pleased to be in that panel with Michael and Verena, and Wetlands International is one of our international organization partner, a key partners for our convention. So briefly to introduce myself, I'm at the Secretariat of the Convention on Wetlands, in charge of the Europe region, but I also lead the water theme globally for the Secretariat. So I would like to answer your question along two dimensions. First, at the concept level of source to sea, and Ruth presented this very nicely. I think it has a power, it's inspirational, and it is also very much linked with what I heard yesterday in an indigenous people session. It was entitled the wisdom of our water, and I really encourage you to hear this, because in that session there were representatives of the Wolf clan of the First Nations of the Yukon First Nations, and they mentioned that, they expressed it beautifully, that in fact they have for thousands of years really understood that interconnectedness, interrelatedness of all realms, where the mountains, rivers, streams, and up to, oh, I'm sorry, I have not to look at you. I will just look at the audience. This is for the online speakers. Yes, so mountains and rivers, rivers and the ocean, land and water, they really had that very much embedded this connection of all these realms. And even one person of these speakers had a jacket with the wolf logo, design on one side, and then she turned and she has a whale. And she said that her clan is also connected to whale. So it has really on her, she was carrying this source to sea representation. So to me, the concept of source to sea is really putting in the words of today that idea, that's very strong idea, that it is no way to artificially separate what is in fact strongly connected in reality. And that this is really a call to transform the way we think, the way we talk, and the way we do. And I think this is a very important part of the approach. It's starting from the meanings and from the understanding of what we are talking about. And this is not a small thing in all projects that we can do. I also would like to say that this concept is at the core of the definition of wetlands in the Convention, because we encompass in the term wetlands not only marshes, peatlands, etc., but also rivers, lakes, glaciers. We have a Ramsar site in Switzerland, the tongue of the Rhone glacier, that is a glacier, in fact, that encompasses the glacier and the foreland glacier. But we have also the Camargue, which is a Rhone delta, with Petite Camargue and Grande Camargue, which are two Ramsar sites. So I think that through the network of wetlands of international importance, so these Ramsar sites, we have 2,500 wetlands all over the world that represent 250 million of hectares. I think it's also a way of helping countries to, the contracting parties, to understand that they have to have this vision of the overall system. And at the other dimension I wanted to mention is that the management approach system, I think the importance of stakeholder engagement across the whole system is important in the source to sea approach. And this is exactly what we call for in the conventional wetland about wise use of all wetlands and recognizing how much residents may derive livelihoods on wetlands. We have a figure, 1 billion residents, 1 billion people depend on wetlands for their livelihood. And so we have several resolutions, strategic plans, etc., guidance documents on how to better encompass all stakeholders, including indigenous people and women. And recently this year, there was a launch of a Women and Wetlands campaign that was called Women Changemakers in the World of Wetlands, under the leadership of our Secretary General, Dr. Musonda Mumba, and invite you to have a look. Thank you.
Thank you, Flor. I'm taking notes because this is very interesting. I didn't know that 1 billion people depend on wetlands health, and I didn't know actually that Ramsar sites really span from the whole of source to sea, even like glacier to sea, and so it's very interesting. Thank you very much. I want us now to have a conversation because I see a lot of parallels between your presentations, and we're going to have to be, unfortunately, very quick in the replies. So I want first to ask about data and information and knowledge. When you go from a nature-based solution, which is very localized, and where maybe decision makers would be tempted to only look at what they're trying to fix, to when you want to go and extrapolate to the whole catchment source to sea approach? What type of data, what type of information change does that bring on? You know, what new information do you need? Perhaps Verena and Michael?
Yeah, I might give it a start there. So of course it's very important to have this basin scale approach for this. So when we have our localized measurements, and by no means we have applied our BioCube right there where I realized a new NBS, to then have a modeling solution that we usually apply in our projects, we can really look at the holistic way of how is the ecosystem working and how is this type of localized NBS really taking an effect. So we can see changes in the currents, in the sediment transport, maybe also in the connectivity, what type of ecosystems are within this catchment. So that's where you can really utilize this holistic hydrodynamics and physical chemical parameters that are very important for this to resolve that kind of.
So looking also at, you know, the way they connect to other ecosystems along the source to sea.
Yes, yes. So you can have, for example, a mussel bed, but how does it connect? I mean, you can have a localized, very functioning mussel bed, but if you don't plan it out to be connected and have a good connectivity with existing other mussel beds, then it has overall in the ecosystem not much of a value. So that's really where you want to foster and play with the whole system rather than just localized approaches.
So information and data on ecological connectivity and continuity also between ecosystems.
Yes, very much.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I think I really agree with what you said there. And in my story, I also showed the importance of data and convincing decision makers. However, my experience as well is that to really convince decision makers, you have to take them to the locations where you're measuring and really show, why you want to solve this issue. And preferably even show already some of the solutions that you're implementing at different pilot scales and show why they work. So really bringing them into the field and highlighting the importance of your work has, to me at least, shown to really work and get them on board.
Thank you. So take them there to see the results or see the problems like you did. That was a very visible thing, and highlight the connectivity needs. Thank you very much. If we think about obstacles, because we've talked a lot about nature-based solutions, what kind of obstacles do you encounter when you want to go from local to source-to-sea thinking? Flor and Michael, perhaps?
Thank you, Verena. We have echoes from the ground through the wetland managers, but also from Ramsar regional initiatives that work at a regional level on similar types of wetlands. And what we hear first is the fact that there is two communities, in fact, scientific and technical communities, one on freshwater and then one on coastal. They are not the same people and they don't naturally share their knowledge. And to me, one aspect could be to blend profiles and careers, just to overcome that, have people that move to one to another. And then there is also a obvious complexity of the size of the river basins. I think of the Ganges River that span over 2,500 kilometers long, but also more than 2 million square kilometers. And this is not the same culture, the same language from the mountainous state of Uttarakhand up to the West Bengal deltaic state. So this is obvious, but we can have also means to overcome that. And I'm thinking of the Ramsar Regional Initiative of the Danube Wild Islands. This is an initiative that looks at the habitats of the islands within the Danube across 9 countries. So it's a transboundary initiative that is hosted by the Commission for the Protection of the Danube. So it's a way of maybe reducing the focus, and they deliver restoration actions and nature-based solutions. And then maybe the last obstacle is about how to sustain a long-term approach, how to manage to do not NBS as a one-shot approach, but really as something that lasts. And here, I think, especially in the changing climate, we have to sustain efforts over time. And I think here a key is mobilization of citizens and residents, keeping them being owners of the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I really agree with the 3 challenges you see. I just want to add also on the scale of the issue. I think source to sea really makes us think in this large scale, while with nature-based solutions, you're thinking more on implementation site level. And that's also what we've seen in the Central Rift Valley, the case that I was presenting. The team there over the past few years has done amazing work, restored over 4,000 hectares of wetlands. But then when you zoom out to the whole basin scale and you try and put that on a map, you can hardly see the total area that you actually managed to change. We really need to think about how do we reach that scale of basins through nature-based solution work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And maybe in like 10 seconds each, what kind of opportunities do you see when you integrate more of source to sea into your work today? What's the highlight? Like 10 seconds. And this is not prepared, guys.
I think by looking at the whole scale, you start seeing solutions that you didn't think about just looking at an isolated issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think with a meaningful design of a localized...
I think it's not working. Maybe use this one. It's
like this? This is louder. That goes off my time. So with a meaningful design of a localized solution, you can have a very enhanced effect on a large-scale region. And that's very important, to take time with this initial and localized solution and do the design with the ecosystem that you have present there.
Mm-hmm. And Flor?
Here I would like to quote one of the presenters yesterday of the indigenous knowledge, who mean they have the conscience of where does the water come from, the water that we have, and we are blessed with that water. Where does it come from and where does it go? And would I give it cleaner than when I received it? And I think the source to sea is helps to infuse that thought into all of our actions, and especially in the water sector, when sometimes people are a bit separated in a very small niche of work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I think we can give them a very warm round of applause. We have time for 2 quick questions from the audience. So there's a microphone that's going to go around the room. Is there anyone with a pressing question? I see someone over there. And please present yourself before asking.
Hello, my name is Nina Kiekinger from the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, and I'm curious, with the increasing number of global problems that we experience and approaches that should go from source to sea and entailing whole ecosystems, how do you think we need to address policymakers, not only on a transboundary level, but to embrace the system thinking better, because their decision making is still very much based on national interest and certain diplomatic negotiations. Thank you.
Flor, yeah?
Thank you for the question. Maybe it allows me to mention a new actor in the source-to-sea system that we have identified. It's the cities. And cities, have wetlands in the urban areas that are really key for the quality of life, but also for regulating flood and reducing the air temperature, etc. And of course, the entry point is their wetlands. But through the Wetland City accreditation of the convention, they are bound to also look at Ramsar sites that are around them. And increasingly, we want to call the attention of what their wetlands are connected to. And in the case of Stockholm, they derive the water, the potable water, from the Lac Mälaren, but the Lac Mälaren is itself connected to springs and peatlands. And so if you pull the thread of all these wetlands that are just here, you should be able to connect more widely. I think it's a long process. It will not be easy, of course, but it can be, through peer learning also. And this is one aspect of the roundtable of wetland cities mayor. That is a way to connect all these mayors from different wetland cities over the world to learn from each other's experience. So gradually. Thanks.
Thank you. Unless there's another reply, maybe we have time for one more very quick question. You're very shy today. No? Yes? Yeah? We have an online question.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, there's two questions online, actually, so I'll read them both and you can pick what you want to respond to. The first question is, can we do more to bridge the conversation and dialogue on source to sea between the disciplinary perspectives focused on biodiversity ecosystems and the other, let's say, disciplinary perspectives more focused on urban anthropogenic development? This is the first question. And then the second question is, how was groundwater integrated into a model from source to sea for the Danube River?
So one very specific question about the Danube, and another one more general about bridging the gap between biodiversity and other more human-oriented techniques. Do you have something?
I think for the biodiversity part and that first question, I think it's very important to be very transparent. As I said also in the talk that I gave, like be bold and talk, and maybe we can find a platform where case stories can be shared so that there's a general learning on and exchange of knowledge that's very much needed these days, so that we can really together enhance and also progress in a faster way. That's key message, I would say, is important.
And I see a lot of parallels with what Flor just said about including cities in this Mayor for Wetlands Roundtable, sharing experiences and how they have improved their wetlands. Michael, do you want to answer to that as well?
Yeah, I think indeed, I think we are seeing more and more already that these two disciplines are being combined with each other. I think we need to highlight the ecosystem services that wetlands can give cities. And yeah, we're seeing more and more the change of perspective from more grey infrastructure towards more green infrastructure, in which wetlands play a key role in addressing the needs of cities. Yeah.
And then maybe in one word for the groundwater of the Danube or the other question.
Maybe, if I may, I would like just to also on the first question. I think we mentioned the divide between two communities, scientific communities, coastal and freshwater. I think there is, of course, the same between humanities and social science, etc., and scientific disciplines on water management and water, freshwater habitats, etc. And I think here again we have to overcome that divide by platforms such as World Water Week to try to really get dialogues among these scientists. About the Danube,
yeah.
But I did not catch the groundwater dimension. Was it a
yeah? How is the groundwater dimension taken into account into this Danube example?
Okay, so I must say that initiative, the Ramsar Regional Initiative on the Wild Island Danube, it's very new. It has just been launched in June 2024, so they have not yet started really the work operationally. They have a lens that is more into the habitats and of these specific islands. So I am not so sure if they have encompassed that groundwater dimension. So it's a good question to forward to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again for the panelists. And I now call on stage my co-moderator, who will take over for the second panel. Please clap. So his name is Frank Zhang, and he works at the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. Frank, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrea. So good morning, everyone. Good to see so many of you here. I heard from my colleagues that last night there were some very nice social events and networking events, so I was a little bit concerned, but I was wrong. So good to see you all. So my name is Frank Zhang. I'm from the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. We are a national agency responsible for management of freshwater, marine resources, and fishery here in Sweden. And I work, among other things, with sources integration in climate adaptation, particularly in the Western Indian Ocean region the past year. So I'm honored to hold this, to moderate this panel. So I'm delighted to introduce the panelists in this panel. Clive Michel, Head of Terrestrial Science from Nature Scott. Andrea Ferret, Water and Europe Program Officer from French Biodiversity Agency. And Diego Jara, Legal Officer from IUCN. So please welcome to the stage. Let's give them a round of applause. Yes, no worries. So, and thank you very much for the previous panelists, a very interesting discussion, and also the questions from audience. I found it very interesting. As you all know that nature-based solutions is a very important part of a climate adaptation, and we, from my own experience here in Sweden, we try to work more and more with nature-based solutions, not least in terms of climate, for the purpose of climate adaptation. And I would like to, in this panel, I would like to broaden the discussion a little bit more from nature-based solution to climate adaptation. Discuss how we could integrate a source-to-sea perspective, not only in nature-based solutions, but also in climate adaptation work overall. So, so I want to dive in, because as we discussed yesterday, that the climate impacts and the ecosystems, they don't know the administrative boundaries, or they don't know the ministries. What are the ministries? So we need to implement the climate adaptation across such boundaries in order to have to address the climate impacts in an effective and sustainable way. So now let's dive into the questions. I think this is going to be very interesting, so I cannot wait to start with the questions. So let me start. So why do you think a source-to-sea approach is important for climate adaptation work? What are the benefits? Very quickly, starting from Clive.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, the previous speakers actually answered this question really well, so I'm just going to borrow from them. There is a really important point about integration, and that's integration of adaptation, mitigation, and the state of nature, because when it comes to land use and use of the sea, they're all the same thing. You can't do one without doing the other. And it seems bizarre to have to say this, but nature is all life everywhere. It's not just the bits that are left over in protected areas and priority habitats and species, but it's the stuff that we rely on to live on this planet. And if you like, if you want to put it really romantically, it's the most important negative climate feedback we have both in the short term and the long term. So we need lots of it. The other important point that was made was about picking important problems and fixing them, and then organizing around them. And there's a big institutional challenge in that, because most institutions are quite rigid in their purpose and don't have the flexibility that we need to respond to problems at different scales and go about fixing them. Andrew.
Yeah. I agree with all of this, and maybe coming from a more biodiversity, talking about that divide, but coming from a more biodiversity-oriented look at climate change adaptation, I think you cannot do accurate climate change adaptation for ecosystems, which, as we know, provide ecosystem services for humans as well. But you cannot do it by looking only at a part of a catchment or a part of the river basin, precisely because whatever climate adaptation strategy you put in one part will have an impact on the other part. So, for example, if you want to conserve ecosystems as they are now and help them overcome the changes in precipitation, changes in temperatures, or whether you want to help them adapt to the new conditions that you see coming because of those changes, I mean, there is no right or wrong answers, but you will have to manage that at the whole river basin level. Otherwise, you will not have a coherent climate adaptation strategy for ecosystems and therefore for humans. And another thing I wanted to flag is that we have to pay close attention to transitional waters, such as coastal wetlands and waters that are both freshwater and saltwater, depending on the time of the day and the tides, because they are highly connected to both freshwater rivers and dependent on their good quality and quantity, and also highly vulnerable to climate change in the form of rising sea levels and lack of precipitation. And so they become sort of a test subject to see if you are having a good adaptation, good water quality, good water quantity at the whole river basin, because if you see that those ecosystems are not doing well, that means you're doing something wrong upstream, and that it means that you're going to be in big troubles in a very short time. So that's what I wanted to flag is, pay attention to transitional waters and coastal areas and deltas, for example, and because you have to adapt at the whole basin level if you don't want to be in troubles.
Many thanks for this question, Frank. And I think that this is a good opportunity to have a better understanding of the complexities that exist in the river basin, also in transitional waters and in the marine ecosystem. I would say that looking at climate adaptation and also the sources to sea approach can help us to look at the environmental, the social, economic, and political challenges that we face in river basins and these other ecosystems. And I would just bring the what happened 2 years ago in the Rhine River Basin with these droughts that we had that affected not only agriculture but also economic activities such as navigation. And this was the point where stakeholders, political stakeholders, they decided to say, okay, well, we need to act. We are already looking at the specific impacts that we have from climate change in a river basin, which is fundamental for trade in Europe and global trade in general. And for this, there is something important that was already mentioned during the previous section, which is coordination. And I would also add political will. I think that sometimes we forget that the borders of river basins occur, yes, at the local, subnational level, national level, but in each one of these levels, there are different stakeholders, and for these arrangements need to be done, agreements, and these political challenges can only be solved, can only be discussed when there is specific political will to do it. And I would say that in the case of the Rhine River, as I mentioned, and what we will face in the future, political will, arrangements, dialogues, the involvement of different stakeholders is fundamental. We cannot think about having specific solutions for agriculture, for energy, to have, let's say, the livelihoods in mangroves if there is no the engagement of local stakeholders with their knowledge, participation, for the aspects also of transparency and legitimacy of the actions of governments. Another point that I think it's important to take into account is that the sources to sea shouldn't only be seen as the impacts coming from upstream, downstream, but also the dynamics that can be seen, affected from downstream, upstream as well. How can the construction of a dam affect downstreams, agricultural activities, but in the same way, how due to the certain activities downstream, certain activities upstream cannot be done anymore. Something that we were discussing in other panels regarding sources to sea, the life cycle of fish, for instance. So all of these dynamics need to be seen. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very good point. And from our agency perspective, I think I will have 2 points to mention here. So by using the source to sea approach, or sometimes we use the catchment approach, it really allow us or force us a little bit, give us incentives to have a more holistic and more coordinated planning between all the climate adaptation measures. So we make sure that the accumulated impacts of these measures, they are, as we expected, they should be. They should not be, because otherwise some climate adaptation measures upstream could make the measures downstream stop working, basically, or will fail. So by having this source to sea approach, so you really have this holistic view and make, maximize the impacts from the accumulated impacts, and also by working with upstream and downstream stakeholders, you can build this collective capacity. We will come back to the capacity issue later on, but just to gather, by sharing data, solutions, and technology experience, all that, we can build this collective and make the measures more sustainable, more efficient. So so that's, I guess, a little bit why we think, now let's just imagine that we have convinced the policymaker, going back to the question there, we have now convinced the policymaker that, okay, now we need to integrate a source to sea approach in our national climate adaptation plan, let's say. So now I guess the policymaker's next question will be how? So now let's move from why to how. So my next question is, how can we, do you think, based on your experience, can we integrate source to sea approach in climate adaptation work measures? So please, Clive.
Okay, so not without some challenges, I have to say. So I guess we've touched on some of this. I think with the range of stakeholders that need to be involved, which is everyone around the problem that we're trying to solve at a source to sea scale, we need a common language to talk about all of our different interests. And it seems to me that risk is actually quite a good place to start in this regard. We certainly don't make enough use of that in conservation language. But particularly in the sense that a lot of our choices in how we use the land and sea are kind of based on the expectation of a largely stable and predictable climate, and that isn't the world we live in anymore, then our current uses of land and sea are going to be very risky in a more chaotic climate within year and across years. So thinking about how we can reduce those risks and build resilience, because in a more chaotic climate, we can't plan for what's coming. We have to build resilience for things that we don't know that are coming along the road. And I guess a key part of that then is being flexible. And when it comes to coasts and seas, actually, they're some of the most dynamic ecosystems that we have. Coasts move, rivers move, but we've come to think of them as rather static in the landscape. We draw property boundaries around them. And then if they move, that's a big issue for somebody who might be losing property and somebody else who might be gaining it. So how do we handle those costs and benefits in the way that land is going to move within catchments, within rivers and so on, as a result of extreme events and unusual patterns of weather? But again, I think risk and distribution and distributional aspects are something we're not very good at measuring of costs and benefits. Are going to be key parts of that language to implement sources.
I'm reminded of a program that we're spearheading at the French Biodiversity Agency, which is called the Life Artisan Program. So it's a European project that is aimed at finding out why nature-based solutions aren't being implemented more in France. And then, of course, taking those lessons to the international level and sharing them with other member states of the European Union. But so we have different pilot sites that we are comparing and, checking what are the obstacles, what are the solutions that have been provided, comparing that and, trying to evaluate and echoing what we said in the first panel, looking at our failures as much as our successes. And one of the main issue that sort of startled me is the problem of land ownership in terms of nature-based solutions. If you do not have the right to do anything on that land because it doesn't belong to you, then you will go nowhere. And land ownership is a big problem when dealing with agricultural areas, because farmers own that land and they want to do something productive with it. So you can't flood my field. I need that, And so land ownership issues are a big problem. So I'm thinking that in order to integrate source to sea and make this happen, you need to be aware of land ownership in the area. At the catchment scale, it's very, very big. But you need to integrate that and know who to call onto the table for discussions. Because it's going to be the same problem. If you want to do something for the whole basin, but you do not have the people on board that are actually, owners of the rights to the land and to the river, and those types of rights differ from countries to countries, so it's even more not one-size-fits-all approach. But you really need to look at both monetary problems, which is, of course, also like the financial side of things is also a challenge, but you need to think about who has the right to do anything on this field, and who should be at the table so that we can actually implement what we want to implement. It's not just about an idea; it's about when the rubber meets the road, when you want to get down to work. Do you have actually the right to do anything on that at that site? And another thing I wanted to say is that if you want to do source to sea, you will need the knowledge, and you will need the knowledge at the whole basin level, and you will need the knowledge in terms of predictions regarding the climate change, and you cannot adapt to what you cannot know. So there's a lot of uncertainty, as we know, but you need to have an idea of what the precipitation patterns will be. You need to have an idea of how the basin is likely to change, and whether it will be, very, very full, too full in the future, or whether you will have deficits in water in the years to come.
Yeah, I really recognize from our work in Sweden. If I may summarize from that, I think it's about to understanding the source linkages in a catchment, understand that all the source linkages, upstream pressure, and how does it affect the measures taken downstream or vice versa, and also stakeholder engagement. We said land owners and also the farmers and other stakeholders. So we will get into those later. So please.
Many thanks, Frank. To be very brief, I think that it's very crucial that policymakers and all relevant stakeholders understand the benefits or recognize the benefits that using this type of approaches has for their environment, for their rights, as you very well mentioned, and also to ensure better conditions of living. I would say that in order to integrate all of these aspects, what we as something that we always mention at IUCN is that we not look ourselves as something aside from a problem. And in this case, we all are part of a river basin. And when we would, or an ecosystem at large, being a landscape, and we all have a saying in how the better planning of this type of ecosystems can be done. And for this, I would say that identifying benefits via having good data, information about the quality of water, about the state of glaciers, about the state of vulnerable ecosystems such as mangroves, paramos, that is key in order to produce good, effective plans, policies for the management of these ecosystems. But but more importantly, I think it is to recognize the importance of engaging all of these different stakeholders in processes. That it's not only, okay, well, we acknowledge that there are indigenous people living here, local communities, engage them and make them part of decision making and also of the implementation of these solutions. And for that, thankfully, there are many examples. I can just refer to examples from my region in South America. You see, unfortunately, cities such as Bogota, just recently this year, they had no access to water anymore. A capital of a country didn't have water for a couple of weeks. And then you would say, how come a city which is in a very rich, water-rich area, which is where paramos are, can face this problem? Climate change. How can we ensure solutions? Planning, engagement of different stakeholders, private sector. How can we do proper planning of and support actions on the ground? The involvement of different stakeholders. Private sector is fundamental. Solutions such as water funds, let's say. These are the specific solutions that we need to take into account.
Yeah, very interesting. I think in terms of just communication of the benefits from the measures or from source to see, I think that we have been, that reminds me a lot about that. So we have been working on that, how to translate from measures, from effects in the environment, when you put them in complicated chemical formulas and numbers, translate those numbers to ecosystem services. I think that helps a lot when you communicate with the general public, with policymakers, because it's more relatable, more easier to understand. So we work a lot on translating numbers to ecosystem systems. So if I may summarize a little bit from that discussion, how. So basically, we talked about address the fragmentations and the silos between the policies, ministries, and legislations, and also ensure, and that's number one, address the fragmentation, and also engagement of a wider range of stakeholder arrangements, number two. And number three, I think was mentioned a couple of times, was this understanding the source linkages, how upstream, downstream, how do they affect each other. So now I would like to ask the next question. So now the policymaker will ask, okay, now I know how, but it cannot be that easy. So what are the most challenging parts in each of these three things? Understanding source linkages, engagement, and also the fragmentation silo. So what are the most challenging part when we try to deal with those issues? So maybe each one can pick one of them.
Or can I
You
start?
can.
Political will. Political will is the challenge.
It's
The crucial challenge, yes.
Yes. So yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I think in terms of integration from source to sea, seeing the connections, oftentimes we don't realize, and it's been said before, but we don't realize that the downstream also affects the upstream, and of course vice versa. And I think there's a gap between theory and practice, and theory and what we can communicate to decision makers all around. And in terms of like, do you want us to also touch on potential solutions to those challenges, or do you have another question up your sleeve?
No, let's just go the most challenging
just
parts.
the challenges.
Yes.
So yeah, bridging the gap between communities who don't speak the same language. And I really like what you said about having risk as a common language, because if we want to, you know, from biodiversity to humanities to very technical aspects of pipes and drains, we have to look at what risk is. And oftentimes people that I talk to from a very technical side do not know about the risk associated with biodiversity, and vice versa. I do not know anything about pipes and drains, unfortunately, but so we need to find a common language to bridge that gap.
So I'm going to go on the sort of stakeholder engagement challenge, because a lot of the way that plays out is that well, we need to talk to everybody, and we haven't got time to talk to everybody, so we'll end up talking to nobody and just doing what we thought we were going to do anyway. And that never works well. So I think there are probably some tools and techniques that we can bring into that from social sciences and so on to understand the range of interests and viewpoints that are at stake in a source-to-sea conversation, and ensure that they're included and represented in a discussion. And certainly from my point of view, if I felt that my views and interests were reflected and respected in a decision-making or dialogue process, I wouldn't necessarily worry about being in the room having that conversation. So we don't necessarily have to talk to everyone, and we can be a bit more clever about how we represent and reflect the different viewpoints that are at stake in the issue.
Right. Yeah, if I may continue on that topic in terms of stakeholder engagement, I guess the biggest challenges we have experienced is sometimes, not always, but a lack of earmarked funding to do stakeholder engagement and coordination between measures, because you really need those money to be earmarked to do this very specific thing, because otherwise stakeholder engagement won't be prioritized in the work. So I think earmarked funding for stakeholder engagement, including capacity building, is very important from my experience, because you need the stakeholders to have some capacity, knowledge about the source to see about this in order to engage them. Otherwise it's difficult. And in terms of the silos, I think we always talk about the silos. Challenging, of course, as you mentioned before, is really slow, and the policy will, political will, and we mentioned political policy maker, how to make them change, is really slow. So from our experience, we feel like instead of breaking the silos or remove or eliminate the silos, we just need to make sure that the silos are designed or in such a way that they talk more to each other, they coordinate with each other more. So I guess, of course, maybe in the long run, all the silos will disappear. We will have a ministry of everything, doing everything. But I guess in the short term, I guess we try much more to make the silos talk instead of talking about breaking them or remove them altogether. And in terms of understanding the source to sea linkages, these connections between hydropower upstream and the restoration of wetland project downstream, to understand these source linkages, I think one difficulty we have is lack of data, and lack of knowledge. And in some, in Sweden, maybe for some of the biggest river, we have very good data, but for most of the rivers, we need more data to understand the source linkages in order to plan the measures and coordinate the measures. Yeah, so I guess we covered now a little bit the challenges on each of these things, understand the linkages, stakeholder engagement, and fragmentation and silos. So thank you very much for your input. I guess it's time to open up for questions from the audience and online, I guess. So, no question? We have been, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. I have a question from online.
Yes.
how can source-to-sea perspectives be integrated into national adaptation plans?
I can start with that. Well, how can they not be, I suppose, would be my answer. For all the reasons that we've just been saying, I think that degree of integration, and I guess for me, if you're thinking about adaptation plans, then it's how do we organize around the risks that are associated with climate impacts and deal with them. So pests, pathogens, disease, floods, fires, droughts, and so on. At what scale are they operating in the area that we're concerned with? How do we then organize around those problems? And mostly that's going to involve some kind of source-to-sea perspective. So yeah, I think for me the question is, how can we afford not to do that?
If we think about the national level, there's two key aspects that come out to me. It's first, the role of the national level is oftentimes to coordinate what happens at the subnational level, whether it is in the form of regions, of states. So there is a key role to play here in order to look across administrative boundaries, make those regions or states work together along the river basin and impose that you have to check on, your neighbors in terms of states. There's another key involvement that there can be, and it is the case, for example, in cross-boundary basins. The national level is oftentimes and still the only speaker to their neighbors. So one nation can talk to another nation. It's very much rare that the subnational level or the water entity has the mandate to negotiate one-on-one to the other, water entity on the other side of the border. So the national level still today has this power, and so the way that they can integrate source-to-sea is first by coordinating internally and making sure that regions and cities talk to each other and forcing this regulation on them that they have to coordinate for the well of the river, basically, the wellness of the river, and being able to perhaps take a step back when it comes to climate adaptation for water, when it comes to transboundary water management, because perhaps people from the ministry are not the best interlocutors, because you also need like a very technical, very precise talk about water management at the cross-border. So it is also the role of the national level to identify the best speakers, on the other side, and to allow that discussion to be made, of course, with checks and balances to make sure that the negotiations are going well.
I would start with, we are facing this global challenge, and we have also global commitments towards climate adaptation goals, and at the regional, and because this is not something that affects nations or that affects people at a very local level, the integration of this type of commitments into regional plans, regional agendas, regional visions, national policies, national laws, the establishment of institutions should be something that comes natural to policymakers. And I think that, and I would like to emphasize again what I said, showing the benefits of doing this, showing the benefits of looking at this approach, that this can have environmental, social, economic benefits, is the only way on how these type of approaches, these type of visions can be really integrated, and not only to have them in a policy, in a law, in an agreement, but that they are implemented. So for this, the role of institutions, and I was listening to my colleagues, they were mentioning this aspect of silos, but I think that having specialized institutions such as a water institution, climate change institution, is good, because there is no way on how one single institution is going to be able to address all of these challenges. What needs to be done is to have these strategies, coordinating strategies. If there is an institution that looks at how to coordinate all of this at different levels, because the actions, competences that we have at the municipal level, very local level, through, let's say, rapid response to disasters, then going up to a plan of what happens, activities in in a basin, environmental impact assessment, permits and monitoring aspects. All of these are the product of having these different plans, policies, laws. So it should come natural. We shouldn't be talking about what needs to be done so policymakers agree on having these type of instruments. These instruments should be done, and it is also our role as academia, environmental organizations, as people, citizens, to push for the adoption of these instruments. And I think this is very important. This platform is very important that for us to say, well, we need the adoption of these type of solutions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I just want to emphasize again the importance of communication of the benefits of integrating source to sea in adaptation measures. In the communication, you really need to make it understandable for the policymakers, for the general public, not least for anyone who doesn't work with source to sea or climate adaptation on a daily basis. So again, this translating complicated numbers to ecosystem services, and after that, you can translate them to economic values, which many times work much better when you try to convince someone to, put a price tag on that. So so it's about communication about the benefits, and also about to improve the policy and legal coherence. So many times when we try to coordinate the different measures taken in a catchment, we notice that they are using different reporting procedures, and they have different implementation cycles. So some of them, they have a cycle of 3 years from beginning to reporting. Some of them have 1 year implementation cycle. So it's all this incoherence between the policies and legal frameworks make it difficult for us to coordinate them. And when we talk about silos, I mean, again, we always talk about external silos between organizations, between ministries, but I guess you all have experienced maybe internal silos, even within an agency or within an organization. Yeah, I'm not saying that I recognize from my agency, because many of my colleagues are watching this, but I just want to share. So I guess we just really need to work on to make the silos talk to each other instead of talking about let's get rid of all of them. Okay. I guess time we have now 9 minutes left for my colleague Dana to make. I guess. Do you have anything to say? Just a last point that you want everybody to take home. One key message.
So, well, we've heard quite a lot about data and monitoring, and that's a constant refrain, isn't it? We need more data and more monitoring, and we probably do. But we're going to do stuff anyway, so why don't we learn from that and be adaptive in our approach? And we can start with qualitative. If you have to start a discussion qualitatively, we can move through to kind of quantifying that in due course if need be. But let's not stop doing things because we need data. We know enough to get on and do stuff.
Perhaps on the, bringing more stakeholders around the table, making sure that everyone has a voice. It will not be easy. It takes a lot of time and effort and also money sometimes to take that process to the next level. And so you will also need very skilled negotiators, very skilled moderators, to avoid pitfalls and to avoid creating tensions around the table that you do not want when you want to work collaboratively on something. And one of the other outcomes that come from the Life Artisan project that I talked about earlier is that having champions for nature-based solutions, champions for the source to sea, champions that are already in the community that you want to target, that people respect and know and have known for a very long time, having those key players sort of spread your own message and help others bring the benefits of the source to sea approach, of the NBS benefits. You will need to have those key players embedded into the community on your side, or it will be very, very hard to bring everyone to the table and have a good conclusion.
Good, thank you.
Perhaps just very briefly as well, in the same way that it's important to identify benefits, that these laws, that these agreements, they don't only look at perhaps sanctions or strict regulations, but also incentives. How to incentivize companies, how to incentivize the participation of certain stakeholders. I think that is key, and that is something that it is not always addressed, because we always think about laws, more strict laws for the protection of these ecosystems, but what are the incentives? What can be the motor, the engine that calls for these different stakeholders to protect the specific ecosystem, to create more opportunities for alternative livelihoods for people that perhaps depend on mangroves, and they are sometimes affecting the health of mangroves. Then what can be the incentives for companies or for these groups to do alternative activities? Just those points.
Yeah, incentives is really key. So thank you very much. Let's give a big round of applause to all the panelists, and thank you very much. And I would like to invite my colleague and friend Dana Dedek from CV to give us some final thoughts and closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. As I conclude this intriguing session, I want to extend my sincere thank you to everyone who was participating here at the session today, but also in the background, organizing and finding these excellent speakers to present today with us. And your insights have significantly deepened our understanding of the integration of nature-based solutions, particularly in transitional waters from source to sea, particularly in the context of our rapidly changing climate. Throughout our discussion, we have explored the potential of nature-based solutions, their opportunities, challenges, and the way forward towards a more sustainable and holistic paradigm involving multiple scales. A paradigm that acknowledges the reality. Climate resilience flows from source to sea. Climate impacts and risks do not adhere to geographical and administrative boundaries, nor is it a problem facing only one sector. As such, effective climate adaptation, such as nature-based solutions, which involves, must also transcend these boundaries, requiring an integrated approach that manages climate impacts in a holistic and sustainable way. The source-to-sea approach is indispensable in this regard for several reasons, as our speakers have highlighted. Ecosystems and the risks posed by climate change do not respect the lines we draw on maps. The source-to-sea approach ensures that our adaptation strategies are aligned with the natural flow of ecosystems, from the headwaters of rivers to the coastal and marine environments, or in the case Michael presented, from the source to the lake. And with this, within this session, we learned about different case studies using nature-based solutions, for example, the wetland sponges to decrease sediment loads in the lake of Abiata in Ethiopia, and how this can actually also have impacts upstream or on like a lake up in the north. So it doesn't only affect upstream doesn't only affect the downstream, but also the downstream can affect the upstream. So as to see thinking on the implementation of nature-based solutions allows us to better understand and plan measures upstream or downstream that may not traditionally be considered as adaptation measures, but are crucial for the success downstream or upstream. This interconnected planning is vital for addressing the cumulative effects of climate risks across the entire source-to-sea continuum. And also an important note that I found interesting was that transitional waters could be a good indicator for the success of such climate adaptation measures using nature-based solutions. The source-to-sea approach is an integrated approach that facilitates the sharing of resources, knowledge, data, and technologies, thereby building collective capacity, which was mentioned by several of our speakers today, which is a challenge that has been confronted with. This collaborative effort not only strengthens local initiatives, but also enhances the overall effectiveness of climate adaptation strategies. Implementing a holistic approach helps to avoid fragmentation, contradictions, and goal conflicts, and that can arise when planning in isolation. And therefore, I might say it can also promote peace building, which is also one of our themes for this conference. It also ensures that the economic linkages between upstream and downstream areas are considered, leading to a more coherent and effective policies and legal frameworks. It promotes more equitable adaptation measures that benefits all stakeholders from source to sea. By evaluating and understanding the combined effects of those measures, we can ensure that adaptation efforts are fair and effective for both upstream and downstream communities. While the source-to-sea approach and the benefits of it are clear, integrating it into climate adaptation measures such as nature-based solutions is, as we've probably currently have been discussing in the session, is not without its challenges. It is easy to overlook upstream measures that are not traditionally considered adaptation actions. Yet, these are often crucial for the successes of downstream adaptation efforts. Ensuring these measures are included in planning requires a shift in perspective and an understanding in the interconnectedness of this entire system. There's also a gap, as Andrea mentioned, between theory and practices, which is also very important to highlight, that we need to make sure to address and be aware of. Successful source-to-sea implementation in nature-based solution projects requires a dedicated funding and staffing for coordination, as Frank highlighted. Without earmarked resources, it becomes challenging to maintaining the focus and momentum needed to carry out these complex cross-boundary projects. And that also connects to relating to stakeholder engagement and capacity building, which needs to consider the financial resources that need to be there in order to implement those. Fragmentation between ministries, institutions, institutional responsibilities, policies, and legislations often make coordination difficult and can reduce incentives to collaborate. But also within the scientific and technical communities, between the ocean and water community efforts, as Flo has highlighted, need to be in order to find a common ground of understanding. So we really need to find a common language that really speaks to everyone, from experts to policymakers to locals that are directly affected by the threats that climate change is posing. Breaking down these silos is essential for the success of integrating the source-to-sea approach into nature-based solution projects. There's often a significant gap between upstream and downstream stakeholders, and therefore equitable solutions must take into account ensuring that the voices are heard and that their needs are met. I'm rounding up now. As we look ahead, it is clear that the integration of the source-to-sea approach must be at the forefront of our efforts to implement nature-based solutions. To do this effectively, we need to integrate source-to-sea thinking into our design from the outset, ensuring that all voices, particularly those of indigenous communities, and I also want to add women and youth, are central to our decision-making process from the start. And we also need to work diligently to overcome the divides between upstream and downstream stakeholders and sectors, fostering collaboration that is essential for the success of source-to-sea and nature-based solution initiatives. And last but not least, engaging with local governments and community leaders who often have the necessary technical knowledge, resources and relationships to implement source-to-sea projects successfully. By partnering with those locals, we ensure that our solutions are both practical and deeply rooted in the communities that are designed to serve. And with this, I would like to close the session. Thank you so much for attending, and you're welcome to come up to us later if you have any other questions. Thank you.